cover what should be contracted out. Easier said than done, if you believe it or not. How to evaluate vendors for goods, how to evaluate vendors for services, two different things. How to maintain relationships with vendors, and finally, how to communicate with internal stakeholders. Because remember, a lot of these projects aren't necessarily having to deal with you per se, but with what other people need, and you are just the one being asked to be responsible for this whole program. So, simple thing. What's a contract? Simple question. Much more difficult to determine in practice, in my experience. So, the simple answer, just to start with working definition, is any supply that is needed in the course of regular operations that is not commonly available through standard purchasing channels. One of the things that I'll try to emphasize, don't relate to the purchasing department. Sometimes what you need is available in-house. Don't try to reinvent the wheel to a certain extent. Examples include, but are not limited to, just based on my experience working with PCR and ELISA, nucleotides, antibodies, APIs, buffers and solutions that cannot be easily made under current laboratory conditions. That's something that really depends from laboratory to laboratory. Some places have a lot of things that can be made in-house. Other things, other than the basics, you pretty much will have to contract it out. That's something that really has to be one of those things that you play by ear, so to speak. Also, I would think, looks like there's a little bit of a technical glitch. I'm surprised that went wrong. But also, technologies that are new and generally unfamiliar with application. So if you're trying to bring something in-house, you might want to do some stuff initially to test it out. It doesn't make sense to build an entire infrastructure of something you may or may not use. Procedures that are not commonly done but required by work, especially a lot of quality stuff, in my experience, requires that type of stuff, because it doesn't make sense to make things in the volumes that you need or what can be used for a given period of time if you only use it like maybe once a month or twice a month, or sometimes once every 3 to 6 months. Procedures, finally, you have procedures where you have expertise but don't perform often enough to justify investing in equipment, where you might be able to interpret the results, but is it really worth spending major capital expenses on something new? So in terms of reinventing the purchase department, recognize that you can and can't get quote-unquote off the shelf. There are a lot of things that are available off the shelf if you do a little bit of legwork. It's not necessarily a bad thing if you get off the shelf. Don't try to get something that you can already purchase. The standardized goods will always be cheaper. After all, they have a regular supply, regular marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Recognize the capabilities within your company. Never underestimate the resources within your company. I've been at many different locations. You'd be surprised at what people don't know what's going on. The vendor is not your company. They are their own independent concern. They should not be something you can reasonably do in-house. Keyword reasonably. The thing is, and the definition of reasonable varies from company to company. Pfizer can do things in-house that a small startup can. Meanwhile, maybe a more mid-sized company could do some of the stuff, could not, depending on what the capabilities. You have to at least think this process out.